you're using like a crankbait style, going with a lure that is set to a certain depth. Right. Like you do a lipless crankbait that's going to run, say, 9-10 feet deep. Right. I spent a whole lot of time fishing that way with my father growing up. We trolled a lot of rattle traps, rattling spots, things of that nature through timber in older lakes where there's not a whole lot of limbs left. It's kind of pole timber, and it's a pretty good technique for that type of situation.
Well, and that's something, you know, a lot of you guys, hopefully if you're looking for your entry point to crappie fishing, you may not have a boat. You may not be fishing from a boat. You may be doing bank fishing, and that's still totally attainable. The only thing there is to keep in mind the same kind of basics, which is you're gonna have to search that depth to find where they are, and not only where they are, but what depth they're striking at. Because as I mentioned before, they'll strike up, and so a lot of times that action is in the up trail, and so you got to find that fine point. Which, you know, if you're using bobbers, you could adjust your bobbers to change that depth in the water, which is a great idea. So, you know, there may be some adjustment to when you get out there. You may not be able to just get a hit right off the bat, but, you know, you got to be persistent, as we've said before.
Well, one of the other methods that, you know, I think about is very, very effective that I've had a lot of success with, when you get on fish and you know you're on fish, and say you're 10 feet of water, but your fish are suspended around 7-8 feet. I mean, if you'll let your lure drop below them and pull up, just a technical term for it, it's called vertical jigging. But if you'll drop that bait below and you're pulling it up, they'll typically hit it on the upstrike. A lot of times, every now and then they'll hit it on the fall, but more than likely they're hitting it when you go past them, when they get that chase response to go after that lure. So,
well, and you know, he's already said it. We've said it multiple times. It's the name of the class. When are we going to talk about jigs? Right. So let's talk about jigs and jigging in particular.
Okay. Well, I mean, all right, guys. There have been so many. You know, it used to be we had beetle spin jigs and we had curly tail jigs, and that was about it. And then they started with the tube style jig. Okay, but in recent years there has been more and more and more lure bodies that have come out there that give you different action depending on how you present the lure. And I just want to touch on some of those today. We'll talk a little bit about jig bodies. We'll talk a little bit about color. I will try, as I hold a jig body up and we talk about things, to maybe give you the experience. I've had some of these I've used with great success. Some of these I bought today because it's like, wow, I've never seen that one before. So some of these are going to be a little different, but depending on your presentation, if you're letting a lure fall and bring it back up, you may not want a whole lot of action with it. And sometimes, you know, where you would use like a tube style jig.
Can everybody see that okay?
Yes. Yeah. We have people answering that.
Here, I'll Vanna White it for you.
There you go. But that's kind of the go-to. That's most of the time that's probably our most popular jig you're gonna see in the store. But you're gonna get different combinations. Like now they've
lost the audio.
Don, you got muted.
There we go. Okay.
Where were we? There were the beaver tail style jigs, which is one of the newer styles out there. I have not fished any of these. I just saw that I've seen these in the store a few times. And then, like, from the old curly tail grub, they've made some changes. And this guy right here is really good if doing presentation, because it's got a swimming tail on it as well as a curly tail. So it's got a real heavy action if your fish are doing a little bit more chase response due to action versus just color.
Action is a huge component for sure. And I think, you know, while action is certainly important if you're talking about a variety of fishing species and different tackle, terminal tackle, I think there's a big question on a lot of people's mind, which is going to be about color. Because that seems to be the biggest stigma when you hear people talking about crappie fishing. Oh, well, I was fishing on the left side of the boat and I caught a ton, and my friend over here on the right side of the boat, he didn't catch any of them, but he didn't switch to my color.
Right.
And so there's a lot of questions about color. And unfortunately, I wish I could tell you which color to go out and catch a whole, mess of crappie with, but it's unfortunately as picky as it seems.
I start there. I have 3 primary colors that are my go-to colors, and I will progress through those no different than I would if I was in the boat for the day. My first go-to color is either a black or a navy blue or even a purple in chartreuse. Probably caught more crappie jig wise on this guy than anything else. My next color I will go to, if that is not producing, I like to stick with chartreuse, will be like a red in chartreuse. This one has a little metal flake in it. This is probably more than likely my primary. It's just a basic red. If those two aren't working, I will really switch the spectrum quite a bit. I will either go with a blue and white or a blue and silver. Some days the fish aren't biting. It won't make any difference what you throw at them. You're either not on the fish, or they're just finicky and they're not taking anything. It can be a lesson in frustration. One of the colors I've moved to here recently is this purple metal flake in chartreuse. It's done really well. And when I start thinking about jigs, I can't help about thinking about jig heads and different ways that we present jigs. So one of the newest things that I've added to my arsenal that's really helped me, I've really enjoyed, this is a rattling jig head. They are a little on the spendy side. This one's orange. This is a 16th ounce. I know it looks huge for a 16th ounce jig head, but that's because it has this rattle tube with it. It has rattles in it, no different than you'd have in a crankbait. My favorite color on this, they make one that's an iridescent that glows, and it works great. It is my favorite thing to pair with the black and chartreuse jig body. And it has produced more fish than so many of the other things that I've used. Sometimes if we're doing a casting presentation versus just up and down vertical jigging, you may want to add a spinner to give it some action. I don't use those a whole lot when I crappie fish, but I really rather get over the fish and be able to vertical jig just because of the way they strike. But it does work pretty well if you're in a situation where you can work some more pole timber type structure versus structure that has a whole lot of limbs, and you can cover a lot more water looking for fish in casting mode than you can in jigging mode. So
and that's where you were talking about that. He's talking about that vertical jigging. A lot of people commonly, if they have boats, whether it be a fully outrigged spider boat, the spider rig flat bottom they're going around, or if there's just in a 2-man John boat and you're literally pulling up to some brush or some low cypress and you're just setting your lines straight in the line, pulling up, doing a slight jig, just getting a little bit of action out of it. Those spinners are going to help people who are fishing from banks or from piers. That's going to help you a lot. Because that's going to give you a little extra motion, a little extra attraction to those fish. But before we get more into the jig heads, these colors. So these colors, they come in a wide variety. I mean, as big as you can dream, they have it. And we can promise that because we were just looking at them earlier today. So I guarantee you it's out there.
I have a small jig buying problem. It's really not that serious.
A small one. And yeah, it can grow, but that's not a problem because sometimes you need those colors. And so that's the thing is, when we have these colors, when do we know to use them? If there was a hard, fast rule, I promise you I would give it to you. But part of it is you're going to be looking at these colors. So this chartreuse color, again, sorry, I know this won't completely focus for you, but you can see there's some metal flake in there. There's some flake there. That is a chartreuse body. Now this color is great to use in clear water. It's going to mimic a natural fish color. And whenever you're, either jigging it vertically or retrieving it, you're going to get some motion out of these split tails here. But this color is pretty good for any clear water because it's going to have a natural fish color. Now, let's say if you're in some turbid water or some really dirty water, this is not going to show up nearly as well. So if you are in that kind of situation, the one that Mark said he prefers is this dark colored body with the chartreuse tail. That dark body is going to be a lot easier for a fish to pick up on in that turbid water. And so that's part of the idea behind changing these colors. Now you could be, oh yeah, and speaking of turbid water, here's another one. Try to get up here for you guys. That's a purple and orange with some metal flake in there. So there's a lot of different actual color changes, but they're going to help you make the fish be able to see your bait, that jig, a lot easier depending on the water conditions. And so that being said, then we're getting into other stuff. So we're going to talk about, you know, he had his rattling tube jig, which is this orange color, and it's got a rattle in it. But say you can pair this up with, say, that chartreuse body, and then you have the orange head with that chartreuse body. And that may seem over the top, but you'd be amazed what the differences in those color combos can do. And that's, I mean, Mark, you know what I'm talking about here.
Well, and honestly, if you pick the right jig body for the day, the old just standard lead head jig is perfect. I mean, if you pick your right jig body, I typically always use a 2-color jig body because hey, I'm happy if it hits either. Sometimes I might miss it going full chartreuse. If I go with a chartreuse purple, chartreuse black, chartreuse red, you know, I feel like I have it. I think a lot of fishing is being positive about your setup. If you feel positive about what you're going in with, some days, you know, your natural colors are the best, and you get something more minnow looking. This is a newer style jig body. It actually has a cavity here in the back that'll hold some air. So it's going to, as you jig it up and down, it's going to function a little differently than some of these other ones. We talked about using spinners. There's the Roadrunner style head.
I love Roadrunners.
That has the blade built into it with the hook.
Great for multiple species too. That one is
right.
That's good. It's not just hot on crappie. It's hot on bass. I've caught bluegill, good sized bluegill off that. It's a good lure.
And there's been some new things that have been brought to the market over the last few years. A lot of people aren't familiar with. I mean, a lot of people. There's a lot of additives out there. I mean, here's a little product made by Berkeley that is it's a very small little nugget. It is completely, these aren't open yet, so I'm not gonna get one out. This is completely glittered up. They have them in silver, blue, green, just a little bit of an additive. There are some things. This is actually called Crappie Ammo. It's made by a company called Crappie Psychic. These are little beads that you add on there that actually have a scent additive in it. Scent additive works pretty well on several different things. They also make a trailer. I do use a trailer on a lot of my jigs. I don't know. It may just make me feel better, but it seems like they help a little bit to catch fish.
And if you're a little confused on what we mean when we're saying a trailer, so that's something.
I can hook one up.
Yeah, actually, Mark's going to rig one up real quick. But you might have heard of people taking their jigs that are already rigged like this, and then hooking a crappie, or not. I'd like to hook a crappie on the end of it. Yeah. But you can hook a minnow on the end of it. And so what that's going to do for you, especially if you're fishing with a bobber on there to set depth, if you put a minnow on the back of that, it's going to give that crappie the idea that, oh, well, he's eating on that. That looks pretty good. I'm going to get a 2-for-1 on that deal. It's the idea there. But it also provides a lot of natural action without you having to sit there and work your pole, either being a retrieve or a vertical jig. So having that minnow on there is a great way to get a bait, or to get a catch, from having that natural bait on there, which, again, while these jigs are great, I prefer minnows, but that's just me. There's nothing wrong with these jigs because sometimes they just want what they want. And
live bait is king.
Live bait is king.
But like this is one of the trailers that you can add, and it just adds a little bit of extra, adds a little extra color.
Yeah, right there.
And
that single piece. Is the
and
trailer.
it adds a little extra color and a little extra action. And this one, you know, like I said, these actually
Lift it up a little bit, Mark.
these actually have a scent additive in them.
There you go.
So, but those are produced out of a company called Crappie Psychic down in South Louisiana. Those guys, they have several fishermen on the crappie tour. I was fortunate to meet them in a crappie show. They got me hooked on those things. I've been using them for a couple of years now. Now, some of the places we fish, when we start talking about crappie and fishing brush tops and fishing everything, we start thinking about how we rig. A lot of guys will run slip bobber rigs, so they can drop a jig that basically will bottom out at a certain point, and they can take that jig pole and raise it up and down. One of the other new products I found out that really helps us out with that is made by a Cajun company. This it's called and I'll show you what one of them actually looks like. The package is kind of blurring us out, but it's called a weed guard. But you can go in. These are little. They come in strips. One of the things most frustrating for any type of fishing is getting hung up. These little guys, you can drop your jig down into a brush top, and it's just like rigging a plastic worm. You take that little bitty piece, you feed it back over your hook, and your hook becomes a lot more weedless and a lot less likely to hang up. And anybody that's fished much, if you've got somebody in the boat that's hanging up all day, it can try your patience trying to keep on a good spot, particularly if you've got a lot of fish in there. So,
and that's
a very handy,
yeah, well,
very handy additive.
They love structure, so that's most people are going to be casting in or around stumps, a different brush. That's a classic place to search for crappie. So that's something like that could save you a lot of headache, like you were saying.
Okay, and back, we were talking about jig heads, guys. A lot of people worry about weight. For different presentations, when it comes to your jig heads, you use anywhere from, say, a 64th ounce jig up to even an 1/8. I stick mostly around a 16th. If you're fishing brush tops and moving water, I grew up fishing on a bayou and spend a lot of time doing that. If you got a lot heavier current, a lot heavier jig head will help. It will save you a lot of frustration. You may have to control your descent a little bit more with your rod, but that heavier weight will not be pushed around as much by the current, and you're a lot less likely to get hung up. So heavier weights for that are better if you have heavier currents. If you're trying to get it down to in deeper water faster, heavier weights will help. Lighter weights are good for some of the more advanced techniques out there. If you get into actually dock shooting or basically catapulting your lure with your rod, you'll get into using 30-second 64-ounce jigs for some of those techniques.
What would you say would be the best overall?
Overall, I'm going with a 16th 9 times out of 10.
Yeah,
9 times out of 10, if I'm crappie fishing, I'm going with a 16th.
Yeah.
It's something that has enough weight. If we've got a lightweight casting rod, I can get a fair amount of distance on it. And it's just the primary thing I keep in my tackle box. I mean, I might go a little heavier, a little lighter, but that's all going to depend on water flow.
Yeah.
If I'm in pretty well just flat
Or
water,
wind.
16.
Yes,
Well,
wind.
casting in the wind that's a whole nother deal.
issue. Okay, well, we're at the 6:31 mark, and so I think this is a good time to open up to some Q&A. So
Okay.
if you guys have some, and by you guys, I mean anyone participating, if you have some particular questions, feel free to put that in the chat, and we'll go ahead and open this up for a few minutes of Q&A. Tara or Bo, whichever one you want to direct to us would be great.
I see one down here.
Yeah,
We got a couple of questions.
Well, I think Mark sees one.
I see one down here that says, what's a brand name of the weed guard?
Oh, yeah.
They're from Cajun Lures. You can either buy them directly from Cajun Lures, or you can buy them from Salter's Jig Pole. That's a better shot of it than I had before.
Which is
But
really cool. I
either-
actually didn't know about this till he showed me.
Either
So-
one of the, this is something I discovered a couple years ago at a crappie show, and it is really saved me a lot of frustration and getting hung up when I go crappie fishing.
All right, I'm going to start with the first questions that were put in and work down. We got a couple about water temperature. What
Okay.
depth is the temperature taken at? And what temperature on the high side would you not fish at?
The temperature is going to be generally from the surface temperature, but that's obviously going to change. There's thermoclines throughout the water, the body of water that you're in. Unfortunately, that's subject to the depth of the body of water that you're in. But what that's going to do is it's going to give you a general idea about it. Am I too early, or am I, or should I wait a little bit? So, once you get that 50-degree mark, say at a reasonable, surface temperature, that's going to give you an idea that generally when it's warmer like that, they're going to come up to the warmer water, but then they're not necessarily going to stay there. So it is fluctuating, unfortunately. I don't know, Mark, if you want to have anything to say about that. it can be very involved.
It depends. Well, and I'm a multi-species fisherman, so I'm really going to hit what's spawning next. I mean, when the bluegill starts spawning, I'm probably moving over there. I'm not saying you can't catch crappie once you get to that point, but bluegill fishing is kind of my favorite. So that's when I start switching over. I start switching over when the bluegill start spawning, late April, early May.
Well, and that's there you go.
So-
Late. What was your date? You said early May. What
Late April, really late April.
So-
last week of April, early
And
May,
that's
I'm
why
switching
there's
over
a
bluegill.
broader, time slot given. Like I said, we're talking somewhere between March and May that the spawn is really going to start turning up, and that's because of a consistency in the temperatures. So that daily temperature read, it should hold pretty consistent, but it's more of a tool for you to use as a diagnostic than it is to say, yeah, I'm going to catch fish today or I'm not. That's just not really. I wish it was that simple, but it's not how it works. But it does give you an idea of when, okay, I need to get serious about getting out there and actually putting in some time to get those fish. Because like I said, it's persistence. It's not something that's going to be handed to you. But it's something that having your eye on that is going to make it a lot better, a lot more productive for you, for sure.
Okay, I've seen two questions in here, and I kind of want to field both of them at once. One of them is, do I use a multiple jig setup? I saw one that asked about 3 jigs. I
Yeah.
typically use a 2 jig
Two-
setup.
Yeah.
And somebody asked, what knot do you use? So both of those are I can
Together.
answer with one question together. Guys, YouTube is a wonderful resource, and you're going to find a couple different ways that people tie it. But I like to use a loop knot. When I tie on, you're going to have a loop down here on the jig. There's a couple of different loop knots out there. I do not have time to go over those this evening, but like it's going to leave a loop on your line where when you're vertically jigging, it's going to keep your jig body parallel.
Yep.
If you use a regular improved clinch knot or a Palomar knot, your jig body can get offset, where I'm not saying the fish won't bite it, but it seems to do better if the jig will stay a little bit more parallel.
Less natural presentation.
Now,
Yeah.
somebody else asked about best line weight and best coloration. Most of the time when I'm crappie fishing, I'm fishing with a jig pole. What I'm looking for mostly, not necessarily color. I don't worry about line color as much with crappie. I usually use a 4 to 6 pound test, and I typically use something with a very low memory because most of your reels are really, really small arbor. So I don't want a whole lot of coils in that line with these lightweight jigs. It makes it harder for it to go through my line guides if I'm trying to cast, or on the really, really small spools on my jig poles, it has a tendency to just not feed out well if I'm actually doing a big pendulum swing trying to get some distance. So I use a copolymer line typically, which is basically a monofilament with a coating over the top of it. Those do not, they have a very low memory, and it's for crappie. I'm not worried so much about sensitivity because that's more built into my rod or my jig pole. But those are, I try and say between 4 and 6 pound test, and with crappie, I'm not as concerned about color. My actual line I use on my jig pole is a very high visibility strand copolymer. So sorry, I'm a line nerd. I'm sorry.
Line nerd.
So that, we do have a question about that. Is lightweight braid okay to use?
Yeah, it would help us on
I
that
have-
memory issue.
I have one of my, I like braid for if there's a little top vegetation, because it kind of acts like a saw and will cut through it. Like if you got a little bit of moss and stuff around the area, I really like braid for that, but it's typically not a go-to for me on crappie. But I do have one jig pole set up with braid, and it's 8-pound braid because it's
What's
such
the
a low
best-
diameter.
What's the best action move to use?
Oh, as far as jig bodies, well, I mean, that's going to depend a lot on whether you're doing the vertical jigging like we were talking about, or if you're doing a retrieve. So, you know, talking about retrieve casting, this hybrid, which has this curly tail, but we're going to try really hard to show you this. There is also a paddle on the back. I don't know if you can see how that's wider at the back. So on something like retrieving, if you're casting and retrieving for crappie, this is going to help, because that little paddle at the end of that tail is going to give you a lot more action. But if you're vertically jigging, then, you know, a traditional split like that with a bunch of tendrils coming off, that's going to be just fine. So a lot of that is going to be dependent on your type of fishing. And that's what's important to think about when you're going in and you're looking at these different styles. Am I going to get action from retrieving it and getting that forward motion, or am I going to get a lot of that action out of the vertical and float back down kind of action? And you know, that unfortunately I can't answer for you, because this is going to be for each individual angler and where they're going and how they're going to fish it. And I can tell you the guidelines, or not guidelines, but, you know, kind of suggestions like we're looking through here. But that's really knowing where you're going ahead of time. And so, you know, if you're going to do vertical, think about that. Think about, is this tail going to give me the action I want, or is it not?
Okay, what is the distance between a jig head and a spinner?
Oh, I mean, very, very little. A lot of times, this
Well,
Roadrunner, yeah.
If it's a Roadrunner style bait, it's right here. They actually attach. Let me attach one to a lure that way
Well,
we
show
can
them
look
first
at.
what you're going to put on.
I've got just a standard spinner right here. This is just an add-on. I think this one is Bass Pro variety.
Yeah, so it will change depending on the head and
Uh-huh.
whether it's aftermarket or not.
All right, you're younger. I don't have my glasses. Sorry, guys. I don't have my bifocals on.
Hey, he can call me younger. That's fine. All right. So this one here, this one you could tie on and see the spinner is actually quite a distance from the head. That's about a solid inch and a half there, where that spinner is going to be up above the body of this jig. But again, like if you were to trailer it with a live minnow, what that's doing is it's giving a little bit of extra interest in there to the fish. Now, this is going to give interest in the way that it's going to give you some flash, kind of like a natural bait source, but it's also going to give out vibrations, which is very big. Say you're near a fish, but you're not right on top of it. If they notice that commotion going on and they see some flash, they think maybe there's some feeding going on, and so they're going to move in to investigate. So that's something that important to think about. But, you know, the fact that you have a spinner on there probably tells me you're not doing a whole lot of vertical jigging. Not that you couldn't, but normally I would think about that in either in a flowing water situation or in a retrieving situation. So that's the biggest thing to remember there.
Okay, we got deep winter, fish schooled at 25 feet. How do I get my jig to that depth with no bobber?
Don't put a bobber on it is the first part, but a heavier weight head. I mean,
Heavier weight head,
yeah.
and it's one of those it's gonna take a little bit for you to get used to getting to the feel of the bottom, because that's deep, and I'm typically gonna fish with a spinning reel. When I do that, I'm gonna try and position myself over the fish drop it down past there until it just stops descending.
And that's the hard part.
And close
That's
the
hard
bail,
part.
and you'll work it up slowly and find out where those fish are suspended and where they're going to hit. And then you're still going to have to rely on color. And you know, I've bounced plenty of lures on a fish's nose without having hit it.
Actually
Still,
get it, yeah.
yeah. I mean, even when they're there, that doesn't always mean that the bite's on. But typically, if you're going to get it to the bottom and pull it up through that school, and just work it slowly, you'll begin to figure out where those fish are kind of suspended,
And
where they're hanging out.
Depending on your
And
type
if
of
it
reel.
is that deep of winter, remember those fish are working a little bit slow. We're going to need to be a little bit more patient and work that lure just a little bit slower, and you're going to have to vary that presentation until you find out what they're looking for.
Yeah.
So here's another cold question.
Yeah.
What is the best area of a lake to fish for crappie during the cold weather?
It's generally going to be deeper, generally, but then still going to be structure. I mean, all fish are going to congregate around structure. That's pretty well given throughout. Now you're going to run into, you know, more gray areas when you get deeper like that. They could be held up on a rocky shoal or over near some deep stumps that you don't have any clue about being there. And that's why people, you know, that have fish finders have a leg up. That's just the hard facts. There's a reason all that stuff is popular. And it's because it gives you a better idea of what's going on where you can't even see. And so, you know, for beginner fishermen, that's kind of difficult because it is a gray area that you have to just literally put in the time and get your hands dirty to find out. Because without those high tech assistances, it's something that takes time and
Okay, now let's switch to the spring.
yeah.
In the spring, what's more successful, vertical jigging or casting to the target area?
I'd say equal. I think you're going to be luckier as a retrieve caster. That's my opinion.
It depends on what depth of water they're in.
Yeah.
I mean, if they've moved up into 6 feet of water, a lot of times it's really hard to get your boat up over the top of them so you can vertical jig. Maybe if you go out with some of the longer jig poles and you can stage a little farther away from them and still get to them. But a lot of it's going to be on how they trigger on that response. If they're looking for something swimming by versus they're looking for that up and down.
Well,
and a lot of that can go with what their feeding habits have been a couple of days prior, kind of where they're geared at that point. But I always, if possible, always want to get as close as I can to them and vertical jig, because that just seems to be my best success, or actually trolling. I don't. Casting is kind of frustrating in some of the small lakes that I grew up in due to so much vegetation. Things have gotten a little better since I have discovered the weed guards, but if I can do a vertical presentation and keep me hanging up, messing up an area to a minimum versus casting and risking, you know, messing up a good spot because I'm in there trying to yank around on a tree and break something off to get out of there. I'm gonna go vertical jig most of the time if I have the opportunity. Well, that's why I like my 12-foot jig poles.
Yeah, he's totally right. I mean, stuff he's saying is very valid. But you know, at the same time, in that springtime, when me personally, at least, I'd be trying to take advantage of that pre-spawn bulk where they're trying to feed heavily, and that right on the spawn when they're still being aggressive and still feeding well. I think some people, especially if you're limited to bank fishing, that's the thing. You know, you got to think about what type of fishing you're doing. If that's you, that's a good time to go, because you may get some aggressive strikes that would otherwise be more temperamental and more reliant on the color situation like we're talking about, and not so reliant on the action. So again, one of those things, you know, what do you have available for you to go fishing is going to determine where you're at and how you're fishing. Right.
Do you have any recommendations for a good lake for a beginner to start out with for crappie fishing? And do you have any websites that might show
Banker boat?
Banker boat.
It doesn't say.
Boat. If your patience is with you, I'll always send people to Lake Conway.
Yeah.
If you're Central Arkansas, it's it's a little difficult. I mean, don't get in any hurry navigating there. But
it's good.
it's a fabulous,
Yeah.
fabulous crappie lakes, one of the best ones we have. That would be my go-to. And there are some good docks that they have in there that when the fish are moved into the right depth of water can be pretty productive. They have several fishing piers on that lake that are ours that have, the biologists have done a wonderful job putting in a bunch of artificial structure. And if the fish are moved into that depth of water where those structures are, they can be pretty productive there as well.
There you go. That was from your area growing up, Northeast
What was
Arkansas
that?
from the bank. You know any of those?
Most of my fishing in Northeast Arkansas, I did a lot of fishing at Lake Hogue. I did a lot of fishing at Lake Poinsett, which we're hoping to get Lake Poinsett back to the fishery that it was here pretty soon with all the habitat work and all the restructuring we've done over there. Lake Ashbaugh is good. There's you can go Frierson, Lake Charles. I mean, there's a number of different good fisheries in there. I've been a boat fisherman up there most of while I was growing up. So I'm not as familiar with a lot of the bank fishing, but most of like Lake Charles and Lake Frierson both have fishing docks that you can go to. They have state parks, and most of our state parks have good bank fishing access. So I would try and stick with something state park wise.
Best method for clear water lakes like Bull Shoals.
Bull Shoals. That's a huge lake.
That's a lot.
That is a lot of water. Yeah. Best recommend. What is the work? I didn't see that question. What is it in particular?
It just, let me go back up. Best method for clear water lakes like Bull Shoals.
Best method. So there, the color is probably going to be more important because depth and color is probably going to be a bigger player on those clear lake waters like that, or clear water lakes. So in that, and also like Ouachita is another good clear water lake. That's just where they're going to be more picky. But the good thing, Bull Shoals, I'm not as familiar with, but I know like on Ouachita, there's tons of covered old growth, down timber there that are great spots to hit crappie. Now that's generally going to mean you're going to be working kind of around the banks of the lake and working your way there from 30 to 15 feet deep, somewhere in there, and you probably get on a good bunch of them. But Bull Shoals, I don't know too well, but I think color is probably going to play a bigger role there.
And one of the things you can look at, we have a lot of different structures that are out in a lot of those lakes. You can go to our website, you can go to the fishing location, and you can find a lot of these brush piles that we've actually put down. Those will require you either to have just a handheld GPS or a depth finder with built-in GPS, but you can go in there. You can like with my Garmin depth finder, I can go in there. I can download the sites that I want to go. I can navigate the lake, and I can look and be like, oh, well, there's a structure over here. There's a structure over there. You can start looking at some of those, pull right up on top of them, and figure out, if those crappie are suspending at the right depths for those. It's a pretty good place to get you started. The only thing is that information is available to everyone, so it's kind of a first come first serve.
But get good for if it's new water too.
Yes, if it's new water, that's where I always start.
Let's get one more good question, and I think we're going to wrap up after that.
We got, on super clear lakes like Bull Shoals, would you worry about line color?
Worry about what?
Worry about line color.
Oh, we were just talking about this earlier in the office.
We did talk about this.
Yeah, I always fish with either fluorocarbon or a hybrid, and that's just me. Not everybody has to do that, but I prefer a hybrid just to give it extra clarity. It's got better light translation, so it's going to be less visible, period. But it seems to be less of an issue with crappie and stuff. Right.
It seems crappie. It's a little bit less of an issue with this is with some of the other species. That does not say that I don't have 2 or 3 reels that are spooled up with 4-pound fluorocarbon. And I use it a lot when I fish for smallmouth, because I typically don't have a lot of large fish, and that small diameter and that fluorocarbon is extremely sensitive. which is good, particularly on a deeper bite for crappie. It's extremely sensitive. It doesn't have the stretch that mono has, but typically crappie fishing, well, they give up pretty easy most of the time.
Hey, you get the strike though.
You get the good strike. You get a
Yeah.
little bit of a fight. They typically, but you can go with a lightweight fluorocarbon. The only thing I can say about that is a very high memory line. Maybe invest in some Real Magic or something to
Real
keep
Magic.
that line from being really coiled up, because the more coils and everything it has in there, the more difficult it is to present that line to get it, particularly when you're casting, or if you're running it through a really small arbor reel like this on a jig pole, it gets kinked up pretty bad. But I will never tell somebody not to use a clear line. I just haven't had a big issue using a fairly high visibility line with crappie. I mean, when I was a kid, we fished with the old white Dacron line. It was like 33-pound test.
Yeah.
I mean, we might tip it a foot or so with some 4-pound mono, but I mean, we were fishing with basically yarn. And I mean, we were minnow fishing with slip bobbers most of the time with my dad, and never had an issue catching crappie because of line.
Okay, we've had 2 questions about feather tail jigs.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely there. That's definitely a part of it.
I've got some somewhere.
Yeah, it's not something you can't use. Part of the reason that we strayed away from talking about those tonight is because usually those are going to be tied in such a way that you can't easily change the body colors. Now you can retie a whole nother jig on,
Right.
and so that's perfectly fine. It's the same concept.
Right.
It's going to give you good action. Those natural fibers give you good action in the water, so they're great for vertical jigging and retrieve. But the reason we didn't really talk about those is the soft body ones are a lot easier to change out, and typically with crappie, that's the issue.
Well, and if you look at like a marabou jig, I don't have a jar of water so I can show you. A lot of times when you're pulling that thing through, if you're not varying your retrieval a whole lot, you turn out where it's just a really, really straight body.
That's true.
And then if you're retrieving, you know, I want to go with a curly tail jig or like a swimming tail jig like this, where I've got a little bit more action. They look pretty good on the fall because those fibers will actually spread out. But a lot of times if you look in that clear water and you just get it by the boat or there at the bank and look at it, that tail will just go almost straight. So all that fuzzy, cool looking stuff, when you pull that thing out of the package, it looks one way. When we're looking at it out in the open, it looks completely different when it gets in the water, where you can go with some of the newer style jigs that are actually designed to spread out, have some more action, and give you a little bit different, more variable presentation.
Yep.
So.
Okay, and somebody asked about recording. It is recording, and after we get the video edited and fixed, I will send a link out.
Yes.
I did miss the first few minutes. I forgot to start it. I missed the first few minutes, but we got most of it.
Okay, right. And again, there are other resources out there on our online nature center, online nature center that we have.
Virtual nature
center. Thank you.
I'm gonna field that one.
Yeah, yeah. But there are a lot of other clips that we have available on our website. Please feel free to check those out. And we will definitely be doing more of these in the future.
And guys, I know we didn't get to cover everything tonight, and I know that there are questions out there. I like to use a slip bobber. Sometimes I like to use a rattling bobber. It depends on where we are. There's just so much, and it's difficult to cover everything. We appreciate each and every one of you tuning in.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we're going to wrap it up, and thank you again for being here. John Burton and Mark Dyer with Fishing Education for Arkansas Game and Fish Commission, and we wish you the best of luck this crappie season. Thank y'all.
Good night.